Zelman, good to see you. Today we're going to be interviewing David Harrison. He is the CEO of Charter Hall. Charter Hall are a very impressive company. We have been interviewing lots of CEOs from very impressive companies, but Charter Hall are very big, they're very acquisitive, and they are one of the strongest performing listed property companies in Australia right now. So very lucky to have David coming on to lead the way.
Yeah, it's a big privilege. A few interesting facts about Charter Hall, which I thought was interesting. Started in 1991. Charter Hall have over 30 years experience with $41.8 billion within their portfolio across 1,300 properties across all sectors of real estate, with another $6.8 billion of developments in their pipeline as well. They're by far one of the most significant property developers, syndicators, managers, fund managers in real estate here in Australia. David Harrison has a very big reputation. I am very excited, a little bit nervous, I'll be honest, about this one. The tie was not a question. It was just put it on since this morning.
I got the suit on as well.
yeah. I don't think we're to gamble on David Harrison as to is he casual, because there's nothing casual about this interview. They're making some very big moves. They've just finished their project at the Melbourne CBD with Wesley Church, where they did a JV on Alonzo Street, did a massive development there. There's rumors in the market they've landed a pre-commit at 555 Collins Street, with a corner of Collins and King next to Rialto. And apparently they're they're front runners for the David Jones in Sydney.
Yeah, that's so interesting.
Which is, you would think, counter-cyclical to what's happening at the moment, buying CBD department store retail at the moment, but they're going.
Yeah, like literally the three toughest sectors in the moment: CBD, retail, and department stores. There's not a lot of good news there, so it'll be interesting to hear what he has to say about that. David, thanks for coming on board. It's so great to have you on Lead the Way today. We're going to start off very quickly on how you guys have been handling COVID. We went into COVID, and Charter Hall was one of the best performing, certainly the most acquisitive REIT in Australia. So how have you managed to maintain that strong performance during the pandemic?
Oh, look, I think there's a big difference across the REIT sector on business models. You got ourselves and Goodman, we're a capital light model. We're essentially an investment manager. We're now the largest property owner in Australia with nearly 45 billion of assets. And, if you look at the sectors that, we curated our portfolio in the last 10 years, there's been a few common thematics that have held up well. Long WALE assets. We've had a very large tilt towards logistics, now with nearly $12 billion of industrial logistics assets in the country. And, essentially, if you look at the sort of 2, 3, 5, 10-year total shareholder returns of all the REITs, effectively, ourselves and Goodman are by far the top performing REITs. And you've got to put that down to the fact that we're producing free cash flow over and above the net tangible assets that is generally, or you can generate an income and total return from if you're an asset heavy REIT. So that's the main difference, and clearly because we are market leaders in all of the sectors that we wish to be in, our relationship with tenants gives us the opportunity to do a lot of sale and leaseback. I think we're up to 9 billion of sale and leaseback in the last 5 years, and that creates off-market opportunities to continue to do large transactions like the ones we've done during COVID, the Aldi logistics portfolio. We announced the Ampol service station partnership. And then we obviously have recently also announced another portfolio acquisition of BP service stations in New Zealand, following up the Australian portfolio we did last year. So they're really the main reasons. And for our business, we've got no balance sheet gearing. We've got well over $6 billion of dry powder in terms of cash and undrawn debt across all of the funds and partnerships. So we're in a good position to take advantage of pricing when others, may be finding it more difficult.
On to the office sector. The AFR recently reported it seems no major office tower was safe in the Charter Hall acquisition spree. So clearly you believe in office. What's your outlook for the sector over the next 12 months?
First of all, don't believe anything you read in the papers. The media have got a great habit of sort of sensationalizing things. If you look at our acquisitions, there's many of the attributes I talked about, like the head office of Telstra, we acquired just before Christmas, the Telstra data exchange portfolio, where very high underlying land value, the 20-year triple net lease portfolio, as I mentioned, with BP and Ampol. There's a lot of low risk thematics in all of those acquisitions, when we look at particular sectors, we look at the resilience of the tenant customers. There's clearly that's flowing through with our development activity. We'll be doing further office developments with pre-commitments to government and corporate, and I think there's going to be winners and losers. I think the office sector obviously has got challenges. Fortunately, we went into this pandemic with pretty low vacancy rates, particularly in Sydney and Melbourne, which will help buffer what will be an obvious increase in vacancy rates. And as I said earlier, there'll be winners and losers. The modern buildings will attract tenants, and the 30, 40-year-old buildings, that whether they still artificially defined as premium grade or A grade, will struggle to keep their tenants, because health and hygiene will be a big issue for corporates. We've seen this in every cycle. New developments tend to lease up and the backfill becomes a problem. Melbourne's a great example. We recently completed the Wesley 130 Lonsdale Street project, 100% pre-committed prior to completion. And if you think about all those tenants and the buildings they've come from, those landlords got big issues trying to fill those that backfill. So I think it'll be very different by asset. I think sweeping statements around office by CBD are going to be ill-founded, and we're actually not a great believer in this hype around a major decentralisation of office occupiers out into suburbs. When you think about it, there's probably a greater need for accessibility with public transport and the better amenity that is typically available for office workers in CBD locations than in suburban locations. So there'll be some examples where it continues. Parramatta in Sydney has obviously been a big beneficiary of government decentralisation. But that market is a classic example where the new buildings are going to be very high occupancy rates and the older buildings are going to really suffer, because we and others will be pulling tenants either from within Parramatta or outside of Parramatta to new buildings. And I think the same will happen in CBDs around the country.
Are you seeing any bargains out there? Any good buying opportunities as a result of rising vacancy yet?
No, and even in the GFC, despite all the hype and obviously the listed markets overreacted as they do, there was very little bargain buying during the GFC. And if you look at the MSCI IPD index, it'll show you sort of major property funds sort of peak to trough went down 10 or 12% and then recovered pretty quickly. I don't actually see, vulture buying being a great opportunity. Yes, some people might be able to pick up, near vacant buildings and turn them around, but I'm not seeing any great distress. And one of the reasons we're not is, we don't have a credit crisis. Yes, some undercapitalized borrowers are struggling and having to pay very expensive non-bank interest rates from non-bank lenders, but I don't see, any great evidence. And if you look at the sales that have been printed during COVID, there's no great suggestion there that, we've got a heavy decline in asset values. It will be different in some sectors. Clearly, hospitality has been severely impacted. Our view is discretionary retail or regional malls are going to suffer the most. They're already in a weak position coming into this, and they're from, of the major sectors, they will by far have the highest peak to trough devaluations, and we've seen that, over the last 12 to 18 months, and that'll continue.
That's a good leadway into the next question. It's been reported by the newspapers again that Charter Hall making a push into CBD retail and are currently in due diligence to purchase the David Jones on Elizabeth Street in the Sydney CBD. That seems to be counter-cyclical with what's going on in the market. What are your views on CBD retail assets in Australia at the moment?
Well, I think once again, you've got to be really careful about making general statements about, CBD retail or yes, we are in due diligence. David Jones have announced that on the Elizabeth Street asset. This is a fantastic, iconic asset where they've just recently spent a lot of money. I look at all real estate as if it's vacant. So when I peel back the onion and look at the underlying value equation there, we find that attractive. So it's not necessarily a statement on, our view of CBD retail. It's more of a statement on that particular asset being, one of the best located, prime CBD assets in Sydney. And we see lots of optionality with that asset over a long period of time. Like all retailers, they're most likely to see their flagship stores prosper better than other stores in suburban regional shopping malls. So, we think there'll be a resurgence. I just went to Adelaide last week. We've got people in Perth and Brisbane and in those economies where, our people are back 100% in those cities. You will see trade return. There will be some pent up demand, but it's going to be very different by CBD. Melbourne's obviously going to have a prolonged recovery because of the restrictions, and hopefully they'll be lifted, and some economic activity will return to that CBD. But yeah, no, we're pretty selective, but we would see ourselves as value buyers rather than trend buyers.
On to industrial, clearly it's been one of the better performers over the past few years, or 5 years really. What's your view on it going forward? Do you think it will continue to perform, and do you think it's currently overpriced?
I think it'll continue to be the top performing sector in this country and most countries for the next 5 years. You've got the double whammy of a sector without pressure on the income line, still historically low vacancy rates, strong demand from existing tenants expanding, new tenants coming into the sector. As I said earlier, it's a massive beneficiary of the step change we've seen in online retailing because of the multiplier effect on space demand needed in logistics. For every $1 billion of sales that moves onto online, you've got significant demand, incremental demand. So no, I don't think it's overpriced, and I think you'll probably see, in my opinion, 50 to 100 basis points of cap rate compression in prime industrial, particularly long leased assets, over the next 2 years. So, if you sort of look out 3 to 5 years, it'll continue to outperform. Like all long lease assets, cap rates will come down because the risk premium of cap rates and discount rates to bond yields is as high as it's ever been. So where there's income certainty from the the type of tenants you've got and the rental growth that you can generate, there'll be strong demand.
For young people watching this, David, what's your advice in terms of being fairly junior in the property industry, or even trying to enter the property industry? I mean, what's your general advice for younger people at the moment?
Oh, look, it's probably no different to what it's always been. The property industry is a pretty exciting industry compared to many. It's got that tangible asset that fundamentally people can understand, touch and feel. I would also encourage people to sort of focus on, what's going to float their boat. Not everyone wants to be a code, expert or an engineer. And while tech is very exciting, the reason why, property as an employer in this country is one of the biggest sectors of employing people, is that it touches many industries. So there's a whole variety of opportunities, whether you're working for landlords, fund managers, tenant customers, the countless number of essentially service providers, from accountants, lawyers, architects, real estate agents. There's a whole number of different industries that feed off this sector. So it's pretty exciting. I think in a lower for longer environment, which is what we're going to be in, property will prosper in that environment, where we are a yield alternative to cash and bonds. When you can virtually get no real return after inflation out of cash in the bank, I think we're going to continue to see money reallocated from mum and dad through to high net worths and, super funds, pension funds, globals, insurance companies. Insurance companies is an interesting one where they've traditionally been allocated to fixed interest, and they just can't survive doing that. So there's going to be more and more rotation into other yielding assets like real estate. So yeah, that would be my advice. And it's also the one thing, given I've got 4 children and 2 are out of uni, one's in uni and one's still in high school. It's anyone that tells you they know what they're going to do at 17 or 18 hitting themselves. So, get out there and talk to as many people as you can, and try to get a feel for what, the employment opportunities really are. I am confident that the sector will be able to continue to employ, a lot of Australians, and, what probably this pandemic's done is you may well see less people wanting to study or work overseas than we perhaps have seen in the past. So there's going to be competition for jobs, but the best way you can put yourself at the head of the curve in that competition is do your research and understand what you're talking about before you get that job interview.
Which companies or individuals stood out for you the most this year?
Well, I mentioned the Prime Minister. I think the Prime Minister has done an excellent job. I think there are other political leaders, other corporate leaders that have led from the front. I don't have any great examples of corporate leaders who have done anything miraculous. I think I would say corporates, there's been quite a difference in corporate Australia between those senior executives and boards that have been prepared to instill confidence in their companies and move forward. And there's been quite a few that have almost been invisible. And I think what we'll see coming out of this is the companies that have been prepared to take advantage of opportunities and invest in their people and invest in their business will prosper. people sitting back, worrying about all the different scenarios that the media hype up about. That's not leadership. So, and personally, I think, part of that leadership, and we've seen very stark examples of it, part of that leadership is to, encourage their people to get back and work in an office environment rather than, taking the easy way out and just, telling everyone, yep, no, everything's good. You just keep working from home, and we'll worry about risk management and loss of productivity. That's, for me, some of the disappointing aspects of some corporate leadership.
What good and bad habits have you developed during the pandemic?
Oh, look, when we were in that lockdown sort of period in Sydney from sort of April, May, fortunately, we had the opportunity to sort of work from our beach house at Palm Beach. So, going for a surf in the morning and the afternoon between 12 hours of, Zoom calls or Microsoft Teams meetings was a good habit. It's something I've sort of continued to try to do since June. I think one of the other things that, particularly those of us that live in states where you actually can get out and have meetings, is not get lulled into the false sense of security that all these Zoom calls are fantastic and you don't actually have to, get out there. You don't have to press the flesh, but you can actually have meetings face to face and try to create some collaboration within your company and obviously with external customers. So I think it's pretty important that you try to lead from the front and show that that's normal. This is not normal.
Yeah, I agree. I think everyone's missing that face to face at the moment.
And final question, David, what is the biggest opportunity in your mind right now?
Well, I think for us is continue what we're doing, stick to our discipline, don't be afraid to invest and grow our company and pick the very best ideas for our investors in our funds and partnerships. Possibly resist, going off piste and looking at expansion that maybe is not strategically sensible. But I think we're going to have, as I said at the start, there's going to be, we'll sit back in a few years and say there's a long visible list of winners and losers out of this, and hopefully we're one of the winners. And as I said earlier, if you've been managing people's money for a long time, and it's in the DNA of Charter Hall to do that, we've been doing it since 1991. We never lose sight of the fact that it's other people's money that we're managing. So, protecting their capital and growing it, whilst also giving them some regular income and income growth, has always been, what we've been focused on. So we'll continue to do that. And we'll probably, continue with because of our business model and our access to capital, we'll continue to be acquisitive, and we'll continue to develop the core across particularly industrial and office, where we see good opportunities.
If I could ask you one more last question, because this has been so good, but on a personal level, what's the opportunity outside of Charter Hall? What would you be recommending your mates to do with everything going on? Let's pretend we're mates for 1 second. Let's pretend we're mates for 1 second. What would your advice to me be?
Well, it depends what you do. I've got an eclectic group of mates in different industries, and it's sort of not really different. My advice, whether you're in a tech industry or manufacturing or in property, and one thing that's becoming very obvious with feedback from my mates, particularly with those that I define as high net worth individuals, is that they really are struggling with this concept of hoarding lots of cash and not knowing what to do with it. And ultimately, if you understand the power of compound interest, sitting with money in the bank at 0.5% or less with no growth doesn't make a lot of sense. So, when I'm sort of talking to my mates, particularly if they're asking about, what I'm doing from an investment perspective, we're always, sort of come back to this simple concept that we're all trying to protect our capital and maximize our total return. And that's going to be really important over the next 10 years in a very low interest rate environment. You will go backwards if you just try to hoard your cash from a net wealth point of view. So it's going to be pretty interesting period of time. And I think what you're going to see is a stark difference between those groups that can show some leadership and on a modest basis be prepared to take some risks and take advantage of opportunities that emerge. So we'll see.
David, thanks for coming on to lead the way. It was such a pleasure to speak with you today, and really looking forward to seeing how Charter Hall goes forward over the next decade.
No problem.
Thank you very much, David.
Thanks so much, David. It was awesome.
Bye.